Okay, so far, our program takes a URL as an input and it extracts all the forms in that URL, and from each form it extracts the action, which is the URL that the form should be submitted to, the type of HTTP method that should be used in order to submit this form, and the names of all the inputs. So, as we seen before in the guest login info program, all we need in order to submit a form is the action URL and the names of the inputs. So, first of all, if you look at the action URL in here, which we extracted from here, you'll see that this is a relative URL. So, it will only work from this page or pages on this specific website. But if we make the request from our Python code, we need to use the full URL with the HTTP, with the website name or the IP, and using it like this, it won't work. Now, depending on the way the web page is programmed, the action URL could be a full URL, it can be a relative URL like so, without a /, so it means that the index.php is in the current working directory, and it can start with a /, which means that index.php is at the web root, so right here before the Metilidae. Now, luckily, you don't need to account for all of this. We can use a library in Python called URL parse. So I'm going to import it in here. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to say my post URL is equal to URL parse, which is the library that I just imported, .url join. And what this function allows us to do is join two URLs. One is the full URL, so the target URL, and the next is going to be the action, so it's only part of the URL. Now the result of this is going to be a proper full URL that starts with the domain name and contains the proper path. So if I print the post URL and run the code, you'll see now I have the full URL which I should post the form to. You can actually implement code to remove the last part of the target URL and append the action to it, but like I said, depending on the way the page is programmed, you're gonna have to add checks to check if the action already contains a full URL, or if the action starts with a /, or if it does not start with a /. So, an easier way is just to use the URL parse.url join, and you give the full URL followed by the action, and it will automatically join it for you and give you a URL that you can use in your post method. So that's done. That's the first part that we need in order to submit the form. The next part is to create a dictionary similar to this one right here, in which each key is an input name, and we already extracted the input names, and each value is a value for the relevant input. So we can do this very easily. First of all, I'm gonna remove this print, and I'm gonna remove this print and this print, and right here in this loop we're looping over all the inputs and we're executing this code for each input. So the first thing we're doing is we're getting the input name, and I also want to use the same idea to get the input type, and this is going to be equal to input.get, and I want to get the type. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I only want to fill text in the inputs that are of type text. So you can see that the text box right here is of type text. So I want to fill this with my payloads that will test for vulnerabilities, and then maybe even fill them with exploits if I do discover an exploit. But if we look at the other input in here, this is just a button and its type is submit, and therefore I don't want to change the value of this input. So I'm getting the input type at this line, and I'm gonna check if my input type is text. Then for now, because we're testing, I'm just gonna set the value. So we're gonna say input value is equal to test. And actually in here, I'm gonna set the default input value, which should be equal to the input.get, the value in the value attribute. So basically what we're saying is we're saying the input value is equal to the value that we have in the attribute field in here. But if the input is of type text, similar to this one, this will be catched in this if statement, and if it is, we're gonna set the value to test. And once we're done with all of this, we have the input name and we have the input value. All we have to do is add this to the dictionary that we will send as the post data. So before even entering this input, we're going to create our post data dictionary, which is going to be empty. Again, it's similar to what we did in here. And at the end of each time we parse an input, I'm going to say my post data, and the key this time is going to be the input name, again like we did in the guest login. So the input name is the key in here, and the value for this is going to be the input value. Then once we exit this loop, this means that we have looped over all of our inputs, each time taking the input name and the input value, adding them to the post data dictionary, setting the input name as the key and the input value as the value for this dictionary. Now we are ready to submit the form. So to submit the form, all we have to do is do requests.post, and what we want to post is the post URL. So it's this variable right here. And we want to set the data to my post data, which is this dictionary right there. Now let me post this in here and see what we get. And as you can see, we get nothing, but basically the thing that will let us know that this has been submitted successfully is the fact that we see result for test, because I typed test in my input box in here. So if I run this code and actually store the result of this in a variable and then print the result.content, then I should get a HTML code of this, and the thing that I'm going to be looking for is result for test, which will mean that the values have been set properly as I want them and the form has been submitted properly. So I'm going to go down, we'll clear this and run the code. And as you can see in here, it's telling us this is the result for test. So basically it means that we successfully set the value of the input box to test, and we successfully submitted the form, and the web application accepted this form. So now, once you learn about web application vulnerabilities such as SQL injections, XSS, and so on, all you have to do is, instead of submitting test, submit the exploit or the payload, and then analyze and see if this got executed and achieved your result. Now, don't get too scared about this, and don't get too intimidated by the way I'm implementing these. I'm actually just trying to show you a number of concepts so that in the next lectures we will put them all together to build a program that will automatically discover exploits for us. And like I said, it's very, very important to keep in mind that you can use Beautiful Soup just like I did before, to extract any HTML element from any HTML page. Not only that, you've also seen how powerful it is to extract specific attributes or specific options that you can see within the HTML tag or within the HTML element. So all of this can be adopted and used in any scenario where you need to read data from HTML pages.